Well, a group of 36 BC First Nations has signed a deal to buy a minority stake in Enbridge's Westcoast natural gas pipeline system. That news breaking this morning, just as we stepped into the office after 4 a.m. Now, the head of the Stonlesec Indigenous Alliance Limited Partnership is calling the deal a significant milestone for the First Nations that will bring several economic benefits. The CBC's Yasmine Ghania has been going through this documentation since she walked in the door this morning, and she's here to tell us more about it. Hello.
Good morning.
Thanks for doing this. We walked into this morning, and I thought, this is an awfully big deal. What are some of the details here?
It is a big deal. They're calling it significant, groundbreaking. So the Stonlesec Indigenous Alliance Limited Partnership says it will invest about $715 million through a whole-owned subsidiary for a 12.5% stake in the pipeline system. And that system extends more than 2,900 kilometers from Fort Nelson in northeast BC and from Gordondale near the BC-Alberta border down south to the Canada-US border. Stonlesec says it will secure a $400 million loan guarantee from the Canada Indigenous Loan Guarantee Corporation, which is a subsidiary of a federal Crown Corp, to enable the deal. That loan program was announced by the federal government last year, and the First Nations Partnership says on closing, this equity investment will be the first major investment to receive a loan guarantee under that program.
All right. And so what led to this deal?
Yeah, Stonlesec will be holding a news conference at 8:30 where they're expected to share more details about how this came to be. But in a news release sent out this morning, Chief David Jimmy, president and chair of Stonlesec, says the Westcoast pipeline system has operated within First Nations traditional territories for over 65 years. Okay. Cynthia Hansen, Enbridge's executive vice president, says now with this deal, Enbridge can build on its relationships with Indigenous communities and advance reconciliation. Enbridge says it has been committed to advancing Indigenous ownership opportunities related to its energy assets. The company has undertaken other partnerships with Indigenous communities in previous years, including last year when Enbridge Inc. and Six Nations Energy Development LP announced plans to develop a massive wind energy project in southeast Saskatchewan. And that project is slated to produce 200 megawatts of clean electricity, which Enbridge says is enough to fuel more than 100,000 homes. For this deal, Stonlesec, which is a new partnership, says its board of directors will represent the regions impacted by the West Coast pipeline assets and will steward the First Nations investments to ensure long-term economic benefits and oversight.
All right. And so how would First Nations communities then stand to benefit from this deal?
Yeah, Chief David Jimmy says First Nations will get sustained economic benefits from this deal, which will fund investments in housing, infrastructure, environmental stewardship, and cultural preservation. In a news release, he's quoted as saying, "People often ask what economic reconciliation for Indigenous peoples looks like. This is it." The Canada Development Investment Corporation, which is the federal Crown Corp that's facilitating the loan guarantee, says loan guarantees can improve the ability of Indigenous peoples to participate in projects that could generate long-term economic benefits for multiple generations, and says that otherwise it's hard to get these kinds of loan guarantees. Yep. It says government-backed loan guarantees reduce financial risks for lenders and Indigenous investors. And the government has also announced that it will be doubling the Indigenous loan guarantee program from $5 billion to $10 billion.
All right. And so what happens next?
Well, the closing of the transaction under the agreement is still subject to the completion of the required financing and closing conditions. And so the transaction is expected to close at the end of the second quarter of this year, at which point the loan guarantee will be issued. Other pipeline companies have also been trying to sell stakes of their pipelines to Indigenous groups. Last year, in July, TC Energy, another Calgary company that's rival to Enbridge, announced a $1 billion agreement to sell a 5.34% stake in a pipeline system to as many as 72 First Nation communities, and it was billed as Canada's largest ever Indigenous equity ownership agreement. But a couple months later, it was announced that the deal would be delayed due to a transaction structure issue. And so this agreement between Enbridge and Stonle is not a done deal yet, Stephen.
All right. Yasmine, thank you so much. Really appreciate that.
You're welcome.
That is CBC reporter Yasmine Ghania.